Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather and today I am here with a video that I know I love to watch and that a lot of you love to watch, but that I find rather intimidating to make. And that is my favorite books of the year. In this case, my favorite books of 2023. So I'm not going to explain this much further. These are just books that I loved, that really engaged me, that I still think about. This is by no means not all of the books that I loved and would recommend from this past year, but it is a very healthy sample of some of my top rated books of the year. First of all, I'm going to start with a couple of books that I don't have physical copies of. So I will be reading them off my phone so I don't forget. The first was one of my first reads of 2023, and that was The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. I listened to the audiobook of this. I think it was my first time actually reading a Poirot novel. I've watched Poirot adaptations for most of my life, but I've never actually read one until this. And I had some friends warn me that the ending of this was spoiled in Lucy Worsley's biography of Agatha Christie, which I had just been given as a Christmas present. So I thought, okay, I'm going to read this right away so I'm not spoiled. Of course, I still haven't actually picked up that biography yet, but I loved this mystery. Like I said, this is a Poirot mystery, but it's not told from his perspective, and I would say he's really only in about half of the novel. Like all Agatha Christie's, it takes place in a small country village. Poirot has moved there for a sort of semi-retirement, but then Roger Ackroyd is indeed murdered. And so the local doctor calls in Poirot to try and find out who killed him. I think the reason that I enjoyed it so much was the big twist, which I'm not going to reveal, but I think that made everything else about the novel really, really clever and really fall into place. Another one that I listened to on audiobook was Catch and Kill by Ronan Farrow. This has been deeply lauded ever since it came out, and rightly so. It highlights the amazingly horrific and tragic series of events leading up to breaking the Harvey Weinstein scandal. And Ronan was one of the main journalists involved in trying to break that story, trying to get in touch with victims to gather evidence, and all of the roadblocks that he hit along the way. It was truly frightening how powerful and how many connections Harvey Weinstein had and how many stops he was willing to pull out to stop this story from becoming public. What really made this experience for me was listening to the audiobook, because Ronan Farrow describes various recording sessions and stories that various victims told him about their experiences with Weinstein. But in some cases, those participants had audio recordings. There was one particular moment where they had a woman wearing a wire to try and gather evidence for the police to maybe really get this moving. And for a variety of reasons, it didn't go through. And you heard in her words the experience that had happened behind closed doors as she was trying to gather that evidence, which was horrible enough. But then because it was the audiobook, at the end of that chapter, he was able to include the actual audio footage of what had just been described to you, which was just extra chilling, but it made it extra powerful as well. So if you haven't read it yet, I highly recommend listening to that one. Then the last one that I don't have a physical copy of, because I borrowed it from a friend and finally returned it to her, is The Skin I'm In, and the author's name is escaping me at the moment, but it will be in the photo of the cover here. This is a book that my friend Veronica lent me years ago that she had to read in one of her education courses at college. And it was incredibly moving. Her writing is incredibly powerful. It's the story of a young girl, I think she's in 7th or 8th grade, which here in the US is being around 13 years old, 12 or 13. She is in a really rough school. She has horrible experiences going on at home as well. And she's in some really toxic friendships. And among all of that, she is made to feel badly about the way she looks on top of it all. But then a new teacher comes to the school who has, I forget the name of the condition, but it affects the amount of melanoma in your skin. So she is a Black woman, but she has these various light patches all over her skin as well. There is a name for it, but I forget what it is. But this woman is also a new teacher. She's very confident, she's very powerful, she's very well dressed, and she is trying to instill this in her students as well. And so our young heroine has to grapple with all of these influences around her and try and figure out what is the right thing to do and how can she love herself amid all of these influences. As someone who teaches that age group, I found it incredibly powerful and incredibly moving, and I highly recommend it if you also work with children or if you're just interested. And I'm sorry, I said melanoma earlier. I should have said melanin, not melanoma. No one has cancer in that book. Then last year was the year of Anthony Trollope. I read several Trollope novels, but my two that I read in Victober were just fabulous. Starting with The Small House at Allington, which is book 5 in his Barsetshire series. I loved this book. I loved the characters. I loved how it looked at the romantic plotline, how it played with the traditional romantic plotline. All of his characters are so perfectly drawn, and it was just a delight. Topping it, though, was The Way We Live Now. Oh my gosh, I have never gotten through 900 pages faster. This was such an incredible read. I loved every single character. You could follow their thought processes so well, even when they were making terrible decisions. Oh, just beautiful. It's a wonderful look at class, the foreigner, the outsider, money, the financial wheeling and dealing that happened at the end of the 19th century. It's just perfect. I think the adaptation was okay, despite having a fabulous cast. Nothing will compare to this reading experience. I highly, highly recommend it. I still think about Felix especially. My God, was he frustrating, but so perfectly drawn. And I can't wait to reread it. Though I have so many Anthony Trollopes to get to before I will probably reread this. I don't know what to do, but it was wonderful. I also read Mad About Shakespeare by Jonathan Bate, which is his look at Shakespeare, why he loves Shakespeare, why Shakespeare was so formative for him as a young man and when he was in school, and how it has helped him look at mental health, or looking at how Shakespeare looks at mental health in a variety of his characters, looking at how it helped him through various crises that came up later in life with his family. It was so moving, so beautiful, such a plea to bring back poetry and Shakespeare in academic curricula, and to have students rise to that challenge and the good that can come out of helping them rise to that challenge. It touched every part of my heart. The Shakespeare lover, the educator, I adored it. Plus, the story about his family is extra moving, knowing that he is married to Austen scholar Paula Byrne. So picturing the two of them together going through that crisis made it even more touching for me. Another nonfiction that was really beautiful and really touching that I read was The Heroine's Bookshelf: Life Lessons from Jane Austen to Laura Ingalls Wilder by Erin Blakemore. Marissa, if you're watching this, you know that book I couldn't remember the title of when I came over the other day? This is it. This is exactly what it sounds like. This is Erin reflecting on various classic books that she read as she was growing up, and looking at the heroines and taking one trait or one thing that we as readers can learn from that particular heroine. And it was really beautiful. It made me proud to be a reader. It made me proud to be a classics reader. It made me want to reread a lot of these novels. It was just the perfect, coziest hug. In that same month, I also read Empty Theater by the author that I still don't know how to pronounce. I think it's pronounced Yak Yemk, but this is a novel that is so beautifully done, and it looks at Ludwig II of Bavaria and Empress Elizabeth of Austria, who were cousins, and looks at the parallels in their lives and how deeply unhappy they were for a variety of reasons, and how that affected their romantic relationships, their familial relationships, their ability to rule their respective countries or empires. It was so amazingly done that, aside from the ending, which was clearly highly fictionalized, I couldn't tell where history ended and fiction started. They blended it so perfectly for the majority of the novel. It was really incredible and really powerful, and if you have any interest in either of these historical figures, I highly, highly recommend this book. In books about other historical figures that I really, really loved this year, my recent read of Antoinette's Sister by Diana Giovinazzo was incredible. This is the story of Marie Antoinette's sister, Charlotte. And you do see Marie Antoinette a little bit throughout, but it's mainly about Charlotte, who is married to the fairly feckless King of Naples after their older sister Josefa dies before she can be married to him. So Charlotte is offered as a replacement, and off she goes. She is such a powerful character that even when she's making decisions that I would never have made, or that I'm not sure I would ordinarily agree with, you're still rooting for her, which is an incredible talent. It points out so many fantastic historical moments and historical connections that I feel like, unless you are deep into academia, you don't necessarily know going through the American educational system. Seeing the connections between these various 18th century empires and how the turmoil in one was affecting the others. It was just an incredible experience from both a fictional and character-based perspective and also from a historical perspective. And I highly, highly recommend it. I couldn't have a best books of a year without including at least one Jane Austen themed book, and this year it's The Late Mrs. Willoughby by Claudia Gray. This is the second in her Jane Austen based mystery series, which features the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Tilney and the son of Mr. and Mrs. Darcy, interacting with all of the main characters or main couples from all of Austen's novels. And inevitably, something happens where these two have to team up and try and solve the mystery. In this case, Miss Tilney is visiting Marianne in her married life, and young Mr. Darcy is called to visit some of his school friends, which include Mr. Willoughby. Mr. Willoughby is now married. These people all end up together at a dinner party, and Mr. Willoughby's new wife winds up dead. And all fingers point to Marianne having done it. So these two team up together to try and prove her innocent and figure out who did actually kill her. I love the way these characters are drawn. It's such a fun, wonderful piece to investigate what might have happened to these characters after the end of Austen's novels. And I love the way that Claudia Gray looks at what it must have been like to have been neurodivergent in the Regency as well, and how much more difficult that must have been. It's a really wonderful series. Another book is coming out this summer, and I can't wait. Then this year was the year of the cozy, slightly romantic, if not overtly romantic, book, and I have 4 choices here that I really, really loved. The first 2 you will have heard about more recently in my December wrap-up, and the first of them is A Snowfall of Silver by Laura Wood. This was just a cozy, wonderful delight. It combined everything I love. A love of theater, the 1930s, London, Cornwall, romance. It's just perfect. In it, we follow Freya, who decides to run away from home to her sister who's living in London and pursue her dream of becoming an actress. And she joins this theater troupe, and self-discovery and romance ensue from there, and it was just perfect. Every character was wonderfully drawn. There was wonderful diversity without it looking like these were token characters for the sake of diversity. They fit the narrative beautifully as well, and everything was just perfect, and I loved it. My other December read that I just loved was Miss Bunkle's book by D.E. Stevenson. This is a fabulous, fabulous read and part of a series, which I was delighted to discover, taking place in a small English village sometime in the 1930s as well, where Miss Bunkle is a little bit short on money, and so she has decided to write a novel to try and earn some more for herself. And she bases it very much on the village that she lives in and the people around her. The first half is very true to life, and in the second half she makes up these wild and fantastical things for these people to do. She gets a publishing deal, it's printed, and it starts selling. It starts selling really well, which inevitably means that people from the village start to read it and start to wonder who this John Smith is who wrote it. Some of them are pleased with the way they've been drawn, and others of them are not very pleased at all. Meanwhile, while that hunt is going on, characters who have not read this book start doing the things that Miss Bunkle made up for them in the second half of her novel. And it was gripping, but not overly taxing. The stakes are not very high. The characters are beautifully drawn. It was just a cozy, wonderful delight of a book. Then the other 2 I read back in January, but I have not forgotten about them. They are still some of my favorite things, and I can't wait to revisit them. The first was 10,000 Stitches by Olivia Atwater. This was book 2 in her Regency fairy tale series. And in this one we follow Effie, who is a housemaid in a grand house in Regency London and is deeply unhappy. Her mistress is awful. She just feels like there's no escape for her. And so she makes a deal with a fairy that if she can put 10,000 stitches in his coat by a certain time, then he will make Mr. Ashbrook fall in love with her. And it's a really fun and whimsical and beautiful play on the Cinderella trope. And it's just perfect. I loved it. I cannot wait to read book 3. And the final book that I loved and adored in 2023 was The Belle of Belgrave Square by Mimi Matthews. This is book 2 in her Belles of London series, which focuses on one of 4 friends who are all equestrians living in Victorian London and their various romantic relations. And this is very much a play on the Beauty and the Beast story, which is my personal favorite of the classic fairy tales. I have always loved Belle. And this one follows Julia, who is extremely anxious, very much socially anxious. She is a bookworm, she loves novels. Her parents are hypochondriacs and very controlling, which is not helping. And through a variety of events, she ends up in a marriage of convenience with, what is Jasper's full title? Captain Jasper Blunt, who is seen as this very brutish military figure, and she's not entirely sure about him at all. But over time, they get to know one another, get to know what works to soften the other person. However, what she doesn't bargain on is that Jasper is hiding a secret of his own, too. And the slow unraveling of all of those moments was just perfect. I highly identify with Julia at times. I loved the way that all of their issues were handled. It was just amazing. Book 1 was great, but this was definitely my favorite of the two. Book 3 comes out this week when I am filming it, so I am so excited to get my hands on it and follow these friends even more. So those were some of the books that I loved and adored and highly recommend you to pick up if they sounded at all interesting to you. Let me know down below what some of your favorite reads were, especially if you think I would love them too. And I can't wait to see what I end up loving by the end of this current year. Until next time, be safe, be well, and happy reading. Bye everyone.